Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will now begin. Ladies and gentlemen, the session will now begin. Please welcome to the stage our
Mesdames et messieurs, la session
chief at France 24, Gallagher Fenwick.
Thank you and welcome for yet another exciting and intellectually stimulating conversation as a part of the Atlantic Dialogues 2024 series. My name, as was just mentioned, is Gallagher Fenwick, and it is my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome to the stage, to sit by my side, General Biram Diop, the Minister of the Armed Forces of Senegal. Thank you, General. Have a seat, please. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry I will not be facing you.
Dr. Pascal Boniface, Founding Director of the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs, l'IRIS. Tiens, Pascal. Thank you so much. And Daniel P. Vajdic, President of Yorktown Solutions. Thank you so much. And we'll now go to a short introductory video.
Rising conflicts and security challenges highlight the Atlantic's need for a cohesive security framework. An inclusive Atlantic security mechanism must address obstacles while aligning with calls for networked multilateralism and comprehensive regional security strategies. What factors drive the fragmentation of regional and global security efforts? What challenges do existing frameworks face in addressing modern security needs? What are the prospects for establishing a unified Atlantic security cooperation mechanism?
Daniel, if I can kick it off with you by asking, when we look at the evolution of the regional security environment from the Red Sea to the Atlantic, what are you seeing and focusing on over the past few decades?
Well, I think the theme there would be the theme of this conference, which is fragmentation. Fragmentation has taken place at a very rapid pace globally, but I would say that no region has experienced fragmentation more than the Atlantic region and Atlantic Africa in particular over the recent few decades. The end of the Cold War undid a more simplified two-block system, which for countries that even for countries that weren't a part of it, that were technically non-aligned, it was still a more straightforward, a more understandable environment that was created by this two-block system. And we had a moment of U.S. dominance, but that dominance still couldn't address or prevent the emergence of fragmentation. Yeah. And as that dominance, which I would argue is resulting or has resulted both from the emergence of other powers, other players, but also from U.S. policy choices. As that dominance has receded in various ways, fragmentation has really become, more amplified, and I'd say exponentially so. So increasingly, in this increasingly fragmented environment, threat perceptions have evolved to become much less common. And this is really significant. This is very important because it's these common threat perceptions that drive the creation, utilization, and maintenance of security arrangements and security frameworks. Yeah. And that's another topic of discussion for this panel and this conference.
Minister Biram Diop, Minister of the Armed Forces of Senegal, what are the key geopolitical players, according to you, that are influencing security dynamics in this wide expanse that we're looking at. And I'm hoping to have a map up on the screen throughout this session, because we're looking at such a large zone, you see. So from the Red Sea that you see right there, all the way through the wider Atlantic, we're the key players, according to you, there.
Thank you very much for your question. Let me, first of all, before trying to respond to your question, thank the Policy Center for inviting me. I have been participating in this meeting for quite a decade. And it is the occasion for me to thank them because somehow they have contributed to who I am today, to the humble person I am, because they have given me the possibility to strengthen my general culture, to widen also my network. So thank you for that. And I would like also to make some general considerations before coming to your specific question. When I saw the title of our theme, which is about regional security paradigm, I found it very relevant and extremely important today. But I right away thought that it would be very important for all of us to not consider this dynamic or this problematic as a stand-alone paradigm. But rather we should to consider it as one of the paradigms we should be focusing on. And one of them is the international security paradigm, whereby we need to work together in solidarious manner to preserve our collective good, which is the international security. That is a prerequisite for whatever we want to undertake. And second, we also need to take into consideration the national security paradigm, because as a team, we cannot be strong if all the team members are not strong back home. So each state needs to do his homework. We are good at home, and then when we meet, there are probabilities for us to do a good job. Within the own states, it is also important to understand the diversity of the security paradigm in our own state. They're local. Depending on where we are in the city, where we are in the state, our security priorities will differ. And this dimension also needs to be taken into consideration. And finally, see what I call the citizen security paradigm, the individual security paradigm. People need to be aware of the fact that they have an individual role to play for their security to be there. Now, once those considerations taken into account, then I can try to talk about the players you referred to. There are many. And if you go from the Red Sea to the Atlantic, depending on the corridor you are using, the dynamics will differ. If you go north and you're going through Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and Morocco, the dynamics will probably be dealing with irregular migration. It's a proliferation of small arms. If you go center through Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, and then you go through Chad, Central African Republic, and DRC, and then Niger, Nigeria, and Mali, and Burkina Faso, the dynamics are different. These are dynamics in the Sahel, where people are facing drought considerations, where they're facing terrorism. Now, if you go to the corridors that is in the southern part, the dynamics are different. So one needs to a little bit nuance the response you're giving to your question.
So fragmentation for Danielle over here, various different actors and different challenges depending on how you move through these, the different parts of this wide expanse of land and sea that we're looking at, from the Red Sea to the wider Atlantic. What is the right approach according to you, Pascal? I know that multilateralism notably is a theme that is dear to you.
There is a double movement, both fragmentation and globalization, because this part of the world is really introduced into globalization, which was not the case 20 years ago or 30 years ago. 30 years ago, this era was out of globalization. And now you have a lot of external actors, diversification of external actors, from Brazil to Turkey, from United Arab Emirates to Morocco. It's no longer the former colonial powers. And the difficulties, you have both a movement of globalization and a movement of fragmentation. So it's a contradictory move, and it's one of the reasons of the crisis. Plus the fact we have a huge crisis of multilateralism in a moment in which we need the most multilateralism. And I think that the things will worsen next month when Trump will be back in White House. You have leaders in the world, from Putin to Trump, Netanyahu, and so, who thought that the use of force is better than the use of the law. And so it's very difficult to bring peace in this condition. And when you look at the map of this era, from the Red Sea to the Atlantic, you have a lot of civil wars, a lot of trouble, and there is very few stable and Pacific countries. What could be done, for example, in Sudan, in which two warlords, with the help of foreign actors, are fighting not for ideological reasons, but just to take profit of the situation. And 3 years ago, we were optimistic. Sudan is going to democracy, the civil society was strong, and so you see the mess, not to speak about South Sudan. Compare the hopes when it has become the 193 member of United Nations, and now. So the era is a very dark situation because the world is in a very dark situation. And you have another contradiction between civil society and authoritarian rulers. Sometimes civil society could win, but most of the times authoritarian rulers take the lead.
Pascal, Minister Diop just mentioned Sudan. What role do you see natural resources like oil and gas playing in regional security concerns, from the Red Sea to the Atlantic?
Thank you very much. Oil and resources in general.
Yes, exactly.
The access to oil, to resources in general, can always be a factor of conflict anywhere in the world. That, to me, it's not about the resource itself. It's about the mechanism, those who are fighting for the access to these resources. I think these mechanisms are what matters more. Because it's about human interaction once again. And if we are not able to build respectful, solidarious relations as human beings, trying to preserve, each one of us, his own interest, it will never work. Because we are always competing in all domains. Competition is part of human interactions. But we need to remember that we are human beings. And human beings can always find a way to find a compromise. If they have a respectful approach, if they have an approach with solidarity, with why not compassion? With why not compassion? Because we are human beings and we have human values we tend to set aside when we are negotiating, when we are interacting. And this is at the heart of what the relationship within our humanity will be in the future.
But I think as Pascal was just pointing out, I mean, I definitely, and I think most people in this room probably agree with you, we are moving at a very fast pace, very far from this ideal concept of, shared humanity and values that you're describing and calling for, unfortunately.
But we need to come back
if
to
I
that.
may, some things. Competition is part of life. Yeah. You need competition to improve yourself, to progress. So you need competition. But in a competition, you could have enemies or partners. And the problem is if you are looking the other as enemies and not partners. You want to be the best, but because you need the other one to improve yourself. And if you see the other as someone who is an enemy, you have to eliminate him. And even to kill him, it's a different. So we have to regulate competition. And so we need more regulation to have a fair competition.
Rules and laws, definitely. Danielle, we haven't mentioned NATO thus far. What would you say are the primary challenges and opportunities for NATO from the Red Sea to the wider Atlantic, as we've been calling it here?
Well, I understand that this isn't the essence of your question, but I'm going to answer it this way anyway. The biggest challenge to NATO is NATO itself. And by what I mean by that is NATO itself has become far more fragmented, to use the word du jour, over the last 10 years, to the point that NATO's capacity to act even in its core area of operations, Europe, I think is questioned by most. And, one should reasonably ask what serious role can NATO play in this region in situations related to, Libya, Lebanon, Syria.
But are you seeing this fragmentation within NATO because some key actors in NATO are failing to demonstrate genuine commitment to the charter, or is there something else at play for you?
I want to go back to my initial comments. Threat perceptions. Threat perceptions have evolved to become less common over the last few decades, and we see that even within institutions like NATO, which historically we can say has been the most successful military alliance in history. But NATO has found it very difficult to transition from this bipolar world where it had a core raison d'etre to a more fragmented world, and has been affected. Its own member states have been affected, thereby affecting the institution. And when an institution like NATO loses this core common threat perception, the alliance's utility, the institution's utility begins to come into question, and that's what we're seeing today.
Pascal,
I don't think that NATO's job is to come in Africa. NATO has huge challenges in Europe. And so in Europe, we all agree. There is very few differences. And I think that the Ukrainian aggression by Russia of Ukraine has has done the NATO countries more closer than before. So no one is challenging the necessity to protect Ukraine and to do something to counter Russian influence in Europe. I think that if we trying to go in Africa or to put China into NATO communique every year, it will be more difficult. So I think that NATO is successful if it's European, so NATO is North Atlantic. And North Atlantic is not South Atlantic, it's not Asia. And I think we have to be to be firm on the NATO goals and not to try to expand both mission and geographical area.
So when we look at this again, wide space that we're looking at today under this umbrella that goes from the Red Sea to the wider Atlantic, who's the biggest military player according to you? The US, China, Russia, another one? Or do you put them on an
It's
equal footing?
US a nation, Russia for the militias, but China, it's above all economic actors.
Economic?
So
Is this something that you agree with, Minister Diop?
I would rather nuance it. Depending on the country you're talking about, the major player will differ. Depending on the region you're talking about, the major player will differ. But I think the issue is not about the players. The issue is about countries themselves. I think each nation should be giving itself the possibilities to decide by itself about the direction they would like to take when it is about their own security. The players are important. They are our partners. We can discuss about how we can partner, collaborate on some specific issues. But once again, things have to be brought to the nations. Nations are the number one players of their own security. They owe it to their people, but also they owe it to the international community.
But if we break it down, if we come back down to the nation state,
Yeah.
as you're just suggesting, what's the best framework to promote cooperation between these nations? Is it at the level of the African Union? Is it ECOWAS? Is it the UN? Is it NATO? Is it IGAD? Is it where do you see that in best form, according to you?
I think all of them are important. You need to,
but none of them work.
You need to, you need to invest in all of them, but you need to remain realistic. Once you do your homework at the national level and make sure that you are the best country you would like to be, then you need to understand that they are transnational considerations. So you cannot alone make sure that you have a sustainable security. You need to reach out to the others. And that's where the relevance of doing things at the regional level is true, has to be taken into consideration. And once you start talking about teams, then you will be facing the difficulties to be dealing with divergent interest. The solidarity you need to take into consideration. But once again, if we are able, even at the regional level, to work in a respectful manner, as human beings, because we have had this tendency to collaborate as if we were not human beings, because we are setting aside the values that found our existence as human beings. So I think bringing back these values are extremely important for the future of our humanity. And once you work respectfully, in solidarity, respecting the dignity of all the members of your community, you create the conditions for success. And then, if all regions are able to create a good team at the regional level with the principle of concentric circles, then you can go to a bigger organization, such as African Union, and still with the principle of concentric circles from African Union, you can unite with Europe, with Asia, and have something that is successful at the international level.
Danielle, I want to move to political and economic dimensions of this proposition we're looking at right now. To what extent would you say economic development or underdevelopment shape security concerns in the region, and what role would you say does poverty play in fueling conflict?
No doubt about it. A massive role, and we've heard many times during this conference that most countries simply want to grow and develop. And I think this is a very simple fact that's often overlooked. I can say as an American, especially in the United States, especially in Washington, D.C., in the policy-making community, there's a very simple reason for why countries want to grow and develop. I mean, there are many reasons, but I'd point out a few. Political elites around the world in recent decades have come to the realization that regardless of the specific nature of their political system that they compose, that the people who live in their countries, if they're better off, if their economies are more developed, that these people are less prone to violent protests, that they're less prone to undermining the system of governance that is benefiting them, that the political elites are a part of, that they're less prone to being recruited by extremist actors, and that they're more prone to serve their countries, to defend the countries and the systems from which they have benefited. And so this is really, really a very simple but fundamental fact that is often ignored, I believe, in the North Atlantic community when it comes to the South Atlantic community in particular. And so when we discuss topics like climate change or relations with China, and here again I'm looking at myself as an American and the policy community in Washington, we must have more understanding for the desire of countries to grow and to develop. And we must understand that less developed countries will naturally factor, even prioritize their need to grow economically when it comes to issues like climate change and relations with China. And unless we in the United States, and to some extent Europe as well, especially when it comes to climate change, show more understanding and learn to accommodate these natural aspirations and to create balance, I think the North Atlantic community is going to continue to lose the South Atlantic community unless we can change that paradigm.
Pascal, you mentioned Sudan earlier. How would you say that, if we can call it political instability there, impact a broader regional security framework? So how do you see what's going on there? And if you can just briefly go over what is going on there, have an impact that expands beyond the borders of the country?
The problem is there is no possibility of an agreement between external powers. The competition between Russia, US, China, and also other countries prevent them to find a common agreement to stop the war or to make a decision which could stop to send weapons to a stakeholder and so on. So if you don't agree at the high level, it's very difficult to have peace at the bottom. And so the Sudan example is a very not good but bad example of how to prevent a civil war. In other times, I think an agreement between external powers could lead to the end of the conflict. But when you look at Iraq, at Libya, and perhaps tomorrow Syria, we don't know, but every external power wants to protect a national partner and don't want to stop. Libya is a very bad example of the chaos fueled by external powers, including France, to tell the truth. So I think that we have missed an opportunity at the end of the Cold War. At the end of the Cold War, we have a united action in Iraq. It was a real legal war of international community against a state who has violated international law, and no, the respect of international law is no longer the motive of military action. And so in this time, Soviet Union, and because it was Soviet Union and US were agreed to punish Iraq, who was the Soviet ally. And so we miss this opportunity, and we are still paying the price.
Pascal was just mentioning external state actors. You're the Minister of Armed Forces of your country, Senegal. How do you look at non-state actors and their influence in the region? I'm thinking of armed militias. I'm thinking of transnational terror organizations, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others.
Yeah, non-state actors are playing an increasing role in the crisis, the conflict we are confronting in Africa and elsewhere. The difficulty we are facing dealing with non-state actors is that, on the one hand, they play a key role in the crisis, but on the other hand, for ethical considerations, democratic regimes are not entitled, in theory, to engage the non-state actors. So that's the dilemma we are facing. What can we do to overcome this? Can we forget about the ethical considerations and engage terrorist groups, armed groups? It's a question. Or can we ignore them while they're playing a very important role in the crisis? That's what we are facing today. But it brings me to the necessity for all of us to avoid creating these non-state actors, investing in prevention, creating the conditions for people to not have, as a last resort, to take arms to be heard. Because we have a good governance, because we give people the possibility to express themselves when they don't agree, because we lessen the frustration people are suffering from. Good governance is part of the long-lasting solution of our problems. Are our leaders living up to people's expectations in their behavior? Are they creating the hope without which people will not have a life anymore? Are they fighting against social injustice? Are they at the service of their people and working for them? These are also considerations we need to take into account more seriously if we want to be dealing with those non-state actors that are making our life almost impossible. And I can take the floor later on, if you give it to me, and elaborate more on about the necessity also to promote democracy. Because democracy is part of the solution today. It is the least worst of what we have as a system. So let us make sure that we continue the democratic processes throughout the world. Because in general, in democratic countries, we don't need to radicalize to be heard. We don't need to radicalize to make our points, because we have mechanisms that are respectful, democratic, that can allow us to express themselves.
But as soon as we look at the issue, I'll go straight to you, Pascal, of democracy. I think that one thing that strikes me is that everybody doesn't necessarily have the same definition of what a democracy is. Pascal, you want to
Yes, it was my point, because democracy is not only the right to vote, but also to have real states, to take care of the people, and to face the challenge of the nation. So you have democracy in Mali. It was a democracy, but people are not agree with democracy. And it was for me striking to see in Mali and after in Niger, people applauding military coup, because I was used to see people demonstrating against military coup in many countries, but not applauding them, because they were deceived by democracy, because democracy in this country is no link with corruption. And so we have to have a real democracy, and we respond to the needs of the population. And I know that it will be the case in your country, fortunately. And coming back to the matter of terrorism, of course, and the non-state actor, we have to fight them, but it's very important to understand the roots and not only to fight the effects. And if you are only fighting the effects...
So the minister mentioned that the root is the lack of democracy. Do you see other roots?
And the lack of responding to the social needs of population.
Poverty.
If you have no justice, if you have no development, if you have no perception of future, you could be tempted to take a weapon if someone is giving you a weapon and give you $40 a month to use a weapon. So if you have education, if you have, it's in fact related to the session you have done yesterday.
Democracy.
If you have a real democracy which responds to social needs of population, you have no military solution.
You wanted to respond to this?
I just wanted to highlight the fact that when I'm talking about democracy, I'm talking about real democracy, as you said. I'm not talking...
Everybody's always talking about real democracy.
Real democracy, liberal democracy. Democracies will never be perfect, as human endeavors.
By definition,
will never
it is
be.
always on the edge.
But we can keep working very hard to improving them. But when I talk about democracy, I'm talking about a system whereby you have at least those basic values that found what we tend to call liberal democracy. the separation of power, balance of power, whereby the leadership, because the leadership plays a very important role in our democracy, whereby the leadership is behaving well. The leadership is not there to embezzle people's resources. The leadership is there to respond to people's preoccupations. The leadership is there to respect the people who have elected the leadership, and to be aware of the fact that today there is a paradigm shift in leadership consideration. It's not anymore about the leader himself or herself. It's about the people. You are at the service of the people. They have elected you for you to serve them at your best. And if we have a society whereby leaders are there to serve, they respect their people, and we have all these mechanisms we know as the critical foundations of the democracy, I think we can lessen the conditions of crisis and conflict.
There's one element that we haven't mentioned thus far, and I don't know if you're comfortable talking about this, Danielle, but I'm going to throw it at you and just let me know if you're comfortable with it. This notion of the political economy of migration and how, in this region, as we look at, migration flows from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe, for instance, this intersects with security concerns in the region. Do you see that playing out at all in your mental map as we look at this space, again, from the Red Sea to the wider Atlantic, with all of these players and these issues that we've been discussing thus far?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it that migration is a factor in security, and quite frankly, at the sort of expense of possibly contradicting myself a little bit, going back to this idea of common threat perceptions, I think that this is something actually where there is a fair bit of agreement in the region in terms of some of the security challenges that migration poses. At the same time, migration has become, and this is something that has not been discussed much during this conference, is domestic politics in all of our countries. Especially those that are real liberal democracies. Politics are especially messy in liberal democracies. And right now, I think a lot of liberal democracies in the North Atlantic especially are facing politics related to migration that make cooperation and multilateralism quite challenging. And so not only are there very clear, tangible security implications with respect to migration, but the politics of migration are also challenging themselves. And I think that that's something that also needs to be considered, and where political elites in countries facing these challenges need to come together to help one another address these domestic political challenges that they face when it comes to cooperation in this space.
Do you see the same thing playing out, Minister, in terms of what triggers these vast flows of migration? And I think that one thing that should be mentioned as well is that often when we as Europeans look at migration, we always think of it as going from the African continent to Europe, but the biggest flows of migration actually happen within the African continent comparatively to what actually crosses over, for instance, the Mediterranean, certainly what crosses through the Atlantic.
I think the reasons why people migrate are many, depending on where you are. But in general, I think people tend to agree on the fact that people migrate because they want to improve their living conditions. They migrate because they want to survive. And it brings, again, what I talked about earlier. Life is about hope. When there is no hope, there is no life anymore. So it is up to those who are responsible to lead their societies, their communities, to create hope for their people to remain in place. But not only hope, but also to be able to fulfill the basic needs of their people. be it in education, in health, and so on. But if people lack of the basic things human beings need to live decently, with dignity, it is normal for them to try to go elsewhere and see if they can improve their living conditions. So it's about, once again, I'm not saying that if we improve the living conditions in our respective nations, people will not migrate. No, I'm not saying that. But if we improve the conditions of living in our nations, we can lessen. But today we also see, unfortunately, that people are migrating because of humanitarian catastrophes and natural catastrophes. Those also are factors that can contribute to the migration
Climate
of people.
change.
Climate change, it's a reality, and we are suffering from the consequences of climate change.
Of course.
And that's why we all, as a humanity, need to contribute to the preservation of our collective good, which is the environment.
There is a link between democracy and migration. Of course, you have climate change, you have civil wars, catastrophe, and so on. But when you have a real democracy, you have less pressure to migrate. So if you could not change your government, you change of country. But if you could change government, you have more incitation to stay in your own country.
I don't know if we can go back to that map that we brought up originally, because I want to look at a specific part of it when we discuss trade routes. I don't know if everybody can see, because it's quite small seen from here. That expanse of sea that goes from Bab el-Mandeb, that separates Djibouti from the tip of Yemen all the way up to the Suez Canal. That has taken on huge significance because of the current security paradigm there. I don't know if, Daniel, this is a part of the world that you're looking at in terms of the challenges, the Houthis, who have been targeting ships going through there, and a lot of the world realizing that a lot of globalization's trade flows through there. And what do you see at play here in terms of the actors, the challenges, and the hugely symbolic and significance of this trade route coming under attack in a very real way at this point?
No doubt about it. I mean, again, I think it goes back to a few things that we've already talked about and a few themes that we've discussed, and one of which is the rise of non-state actors. It's not just countries that can now affect trade dynamics. I mean, it's even non-state actors who do not have, let's say, endless resources that can really affect prosperity. Resources as well. I mean, coming out of this part of the world. I think that we talked about resources in the context of competition, and there's no doubt there's competition over resources, and there always will be. At the same time, in this part of the world, sometimes we also see the global need for commodities and for resources as actually something that is dampening security concerns and issues and fostering cooperation. Because at the end of the day, again, whether you're the United States or China or a country in Atlantic Africa, you're consuming these resources, and the price of these resources affects you, and it affects the stability of your government, and it affects a lot about everyday occurrences in your country. And so, in some ways, there's the potential to bind as well, and we see that when it comes to some of these trade routes in this part of the world.
I think that so people understand in a very concrete way, when ships no longer are able to go through that strait, they literally have to go all the way around the Horn of Africa. And that increases, obviously, fuel consumption for the ships. It's going to increase the price of the goods that are being transported. It's going to increase transport time. It's going to increase delays in terms of when you receive those goods. And that is a major route that goes from Asia, China, notably, not only, but mainly, and all the way up to Europe, for instance. Pascal, is that an area that you've been looking at as well in terms of
not specifically, it's not my main occupation, but I know. But of course, it's a side effect of globalization. So it's even in a far area with a non-state actor, which is not very powerful, Houthi, they could create a huge disruption of international trade with many huge economic implications. So the Houthi are not a military superpower, but it's the deterrence from the weak to the strong.
Yeah.
Because even this militia, which have few weapons, help from Iran and so on, but they have devastated
Huge
international
impact.
trade in few days. And it was very difficult to respond because we have a shift of position between France from one side and Germany and UK and US on the other. Do we have to bomb Yemen to stop the Houthi action, or could we worsen the situation by doing so? And so it's not an easy answer when you have this kind of channel, because to whom we could talk. So it's do we have to take contact with Houthi and whatever their revendication, and so it's very difficult to solve the problem.
Yeah. So who do you talk to? The Houthis? How do you go about this?
You have to talk to everybody.
Uh-huh.
And that's what makes
Including the non-state actors.
in some way. But what I'm saying here is my personal beliefs. They're not reflecting my country's points of view. But I think whenever it is possible to talk to people, you should talk to people. Now, the way you talk to each one of these people might differ from one to another. But communication, in my opinion, is the best way to convince, to advocate communication. It's not always easy. It requires patience and talent. And also, it requires tolerance. Because when you communicate, you might be hearing things you don't like. But it is part of human interaction. It brings back this consideration I have been emphasizing since the beginning of this meeting. Rehumanize our interactions. We have dehumanized our interactions throughout the decades, and it's now creating our lives a bit more difficult. Even at our family level, we do not always have the human interactions we need to have to live in a respectful environment and constructive environment. Let alone now the interactions we're having between states, between governments. People tend to impose their views, to interact with others with condescendency. It does not work. Because security cannot be imposed to people. It's a mindset. It requires ownership and conviction. You can be stronger and come and have the impression that you are imposing security while you are not. You're imposing your will for a while, but the person will never abide by your rules. And sooner or later, it's going to backfire. So in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think the humanity should do its homework and rehumanize before it is too late the interactions between human beings.
On the subject to talk, you could have a big spoon and eat with them. Because if they are important, if they have an important action, you could not ignore them.
Yeah.
Because they are a reality, and so it's the real politics is very criticized, but there is worse than real politics, irreal politics. So you could not love them, but you have to talk with them because they are part of the problem. But to discuss with someone is not to accept everything from him. But you could not ignore an organization whose effect is important on international stage.
Moving away from the space, Danielle, and heading towards the security cooperation, regional security cooperation, how can it be improved between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa to address common threats like terrorism, organized crime, political instability?
Well, first of all, I would certainly defer to the minister on that question for his perspective. But from my perspective, from let's say a North Atlantic perspective, I think, it's illustrative to talk about something that Ambassador Amrani mentioned on day one, the African Lion military exercise here in Morocco that's been hosted now for 20 years. It's the largest multilateral defense exercise in Africa under U.S. AFRICOM that also brings in NATO. So also brings in a North Atlantic institution that has a lot to share. And it brings together about 8,200 military personnel in 27 countries, and again, plus NATO. And I think it's an important example of something that we need more of, and that is, these exercises, these concrete exercises, these concrete platforms for sharing experience and best practices like African Lion. And again, and this is where I defer to the minister as well, and echo some of the things that were said before on previous panels, that this can occur also within the region, at the initiative of the region, North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa doing this on their own. But here's one example where, to go back to the broader theme here of this conference, which is how do we bring together, how do we actually forge a common Atlantic space? This is a good example of that in the security space. And so I'd like to see more African Lions, both, again, within the region, being initiated by Sub-Saharan and North Africa, but also, when possible, bring in the North Atlantic and institutions like NATO.
Minister Diop, you agree?
No, I totally agree with him. I just want to nuance what I said. There are a lot of good things taking place, like African Lion, and many other initiatives that are delivering very good result. But we can do more. I just want to emphasize the fact that we can do more.
What more should be done? Can you be a little bit more concrete and specific in terms of, again, improving regional security coordination between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa? We just heard about, common military exercises that bring in a NATO dimension. What else are you thinking of?
First of all, we need to invest in making sure that North Africa itself is doing things together. Because if North Africa does not do things together, it will be very challenging for North Africa to be doing things with Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's very challenging because of reasons we know. So we need to continue. We should not give up. We need to continue to discuss because, once again, sometimes things are not as easy as we could expect. But we should not give up. We should continue to try until the day we will have good result in North Africa. Because if North Africa is not united, it will naturally impact negatively what is happening throughout the entire continent. They are our brothers, they are our sisters. We need to continue to engage with them so that we have an homogeneous region that can now collaborate with the others. It can be in all domains. The only thing that matters is that the selection of the domains should be done collaboratively. People need to agree on which domain they need to collaborate on. It cannot be imposed, it cannot be coming from outside, it has to be
agreed upon
in a team spirit. And once you have this participatory, inclusive way of selecting the sectors that are our priorities, then there is ownership and we can have good result.
We have about 21 minutes left. I want to go to questions and remarks from the room. I'm going to start with people right behind me, if there are any, because I've been turning my back to them. And I'm going to take three at a time. So I'll start with you, sir, as soon as you're handed a mic. Gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. Farid Belhaj, I'm with the Policy Center. Picking up on, first of all, great panel. Picking up your last point on North Africa, the whole interface with the rest of Africa. For me, anyway, Africa starts in Tunisia and ends in South Africa. There is no such a thing as, division. But it is a fact. Now, the question is, with what's happening now in Syria and all the turmoil that we see coming, big like a, how do you assess the impact of what's happening now in Syria on North Africa, bearing in mind that we saw when the war in the Balkan ended, how people coming back from the Balkans had an impact on the stability of North Africa, and we can go on and on in terms of those trends of instability. So the point is, do you think that the Middle East will have an impact on what's happening now in North Africa? Thank you.
Great question. A couple more. Gentleman over here, red tie, first row, right here. Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. I just running on the same thread. I think it is that the pertinent point of view.
And if you could just state your name and organization.
Yeah, Magid Abdelaziz. I'm the representative of the League of Arab States to the United Nations in New York. And I thank Minister Diop for pointing to the issue of North Africa, because it is very important. I served as an Under-Secretary General for Africa in the United Nations, and I failed to get North African or the Maghreb Union to attend a single meeting in the United Nations for 5 years. So it is really regrettable that we, among North Africans, are divided that way. But coming to say that, I also want to pick on on what is happening in West Africa. Whether what the minister think that the separation of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso could be averted, or what kind of implications could this have on ECOWAS, and what kind of implications could this have on the Atlantic?
Thank you so much. Gentleman over here, first row. To my left. Glasses. Right here. There we go.
Merci, Monsieur le Modérateur.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Hassan. I'm a researcher at the Royal Institute of Strategic Studies. This way of addressing things really spoke to me. I mean, the general, when he talks about combating terrorism, and these are important phenomena when we look at the process of African Atlantic countries. I think that the experiences that we've seen have shown that combating transnational criminality, organized, so terrorism, all sorts of smuggling, etc., everything has shown that that individual states' actions have their limits. Since we're talking about the Atlantic and Africa, the global threat, global strategy, major players, global players, a state is never strong against terrorism, and this has been shown elsewhere. And so that's why I would like a maritime strategy. It exists, and respectfully, I would like to ask you to address this problem through coalitions that already exist. And last point, when we want to fight pirates, and we go prospecting in this side of Africa, and we thought that pirates, we have to tackle them at sea, but that's not the case. The lack of coordination, the lack of, or the fact that there's so much divergence. I hope that one day we will have a regional fight. We will be fighting regionally, because these are regional threats that we need to address together. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Khadija. I'm an Adele Emerging Leader 2023. Since the panel was also about creating hope, en général, Haya, What is the role of disarmament in this whole region, from the Red Sea, particularly the Red Sea and around the Red Sea, all the way to the Atlantic? Monsieur Boniface, I also know that you've written books about disarmament, and probably, since we are here to be bold and innovative, could that be the solution to peace and security? And I would certainly love to hear your opinion representing the Northern Atlantic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great. Who wants to take the question on the impact of Syria on North Africa? Events unfolding in Syria, possibly fighters returning here, and do you want to take that, Mr. Diop?
Yes, I can take it. But I hope I will not be disappointing.
You never are disappointing.
Because I don't know.
No, of course we don't. No,
I
of
don't
course.
know. I wish I knew.
Yeah.
And it's just to say that there are a lot of uncertainties.
Yes.
Nobody knows. Nobody can tell you what will happen
Yeah.
in the coming months, in the coming years, because of the situation in Syria. We can extrapolate.
Yeah.
We can extrapolate, and extrapolation can lead you to the truth or not to the truth. Probably it will highly depend on the way the new authorities will be dealing with the situation and will be dealing with their people. If they are able to bring back hope, if they create the trustful environment the people need to remain in place, maybe Syria can become a place where it is lovely to live. And if the leadership, unfortunately, is not able to create those conditions I have described, maybe the consequences can be very negative and impact what is going on in the entire region. We don't know either what will happen in terms of the attitude of the external actors. Nobody knows. What will be the position of Israel vis-à-vis Syria? And depending on this position, what are the consequences that can create a turmoil in Syria and in the region? I don't know. But once again, I can affirm that with the butterfly effect, we all know.
Interconnectedness.
Whenever something takes place somewhere, it has repercussions.
Of course.
Elsewhere. Now we don't know what types of repercussions, but there will be repercussions.
So let me do something that we haven't really done here at the Atlantic Dialogues thus far. The gentleman who asked the question, you're asking that question for very specific reasons. You have scenarios in your head. And I'm wondering if we can pass you the mic again. And since I'm not asking you for what the future holds, but you're asking that question for very specific reasons, and I'd like you to elaborate on what are the reasons for which you, standing here in Morocco, are looking at this phenomenon, probably with a certain amount of joy, given the Assad regime's behavior over the past 50 years, but also with a certain amount of apprehension. Can you explain why that is?
2 points. One, when things happened in North Africa in 2010, 2011, they had repercussion effects all the way. But those were repercussion effects that were based on people rising against something. Now what's happening in Syria is a violent dynamic that is not just about Syrians. Those who are now from Idlib, etc., going to Damascus, are not all Syrians. They are coming from all over the world. They are coming from China, they are coming from Central Asia. They are also coming from North Africa. And if this gentleman who is now leading Syria restores any type of stability, that's fine for the Syrians. But those who have helped him get to where he is right now may very much think that they can help themselves in their own countries of origin. And this is where my concern about our part of Africa comes from.
Thank you so much for sharing that point with us. West Africa, the issue of West Africa and the future of ECOWAS, as was asked by the gentleman behind you.
First of all, I would like to highlight the fact that we are all very concerned about this division we are witnessing now within our wonderful economic community of West African states. We were very proud of. Not a perfect organization, but an organization that has initiated a lot of good things. Yeah. So whenever separation takes place, it's a reason to be a bit sad and regretful. We are very close to the deadline for these countries to be technically outside of our community. But we are very persistent, and we are still trying to convince them that they have space in ECOWAS. So far, we have not been able to convince, but we are not giving up. Maybe they can change their mind and remain. But whatever will happen in the coming weeks or months, I think we need to respect people's decisions. It is their sovereign decision to decide with whom they would like to partner. If they don't feel at ease in ECOWAS and they decide to go, yes, we can try to convince them to not go, but if we are not able, we need to accept and to respect. That's the way democracy works. People have the freedom to decide about the future they want to give themselves. And one day, if they leave, I don't know. Nobody knows if they will leave for good or if they will remain. It's again uncertain because we are in a phase of negotiation. The community was able to designate negotiators, and my country is very proud to be a part of these negotiations. And our president is doing his best to make sure that he speaks to his brothers of Niger, of Mali, and Burkina Faso, so that we remain a solidarious family.
But just very quickly, does ECOWAS still make sense without Mali, without Burkina, without Niger?
ECOWAS will always make sense, regardless the number of countries that constitute ECOWAS. Regardless, we'll always, because together we are always stronger, my friend. Together we are always stronger. So wherever you can build, team, you can collaborate, in my opinion. You should go ahead and create this team, because together we are always stronger.
Danielle, on this comment by the gentleman over here in the first row, that the fight against piracy actually begins on land and not at sea, on the contrary to what most people think. Do you agree with that statement, and why or why not?
I do, and I also think that, again, the notion of some sort of security mechanism or framework being forged in the broader Atlantic community, I think that maritime issues is the area where this has the most potential. And I think that this is the lowest hanging fruit. And so, again, going back to common threat perceptions, I think this is where they're most common, quite frankly. And if we look at the initiatives that have materialized over the last few years, whether it's the Partnership for Atlantic Cooperation or things derived from the Rabat Declaration and Morocco's initiative, that they all mention maritime security. They all talk about maritime security and this being a common threat, a common challenge. And so I think that this is what I would describe as the lowest hanging fruit. And if the Atlantic community can't come together on the basis of maritime security, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical about areas of cooperation in other areas.
Pascal, the question for you about disarmament as being key to peace.
I made my PhD some years ago on disarmament, and so it has not working very well because, in fact, we witness a global arms race in every part of the world, in Asia, in Middle East, in Europe, and Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, asked European countries to increase their military expenditure from 2 to 3% of GDP. Telling that there is enough money in welfare and you have to take some money in welfare. So we have a huge challenge not to destroy our society from within, to protect our society from abroad. And I think that arms race is a threat from our internal security. And of course, we need to reverse the gear. But unfortunately, I don't see any opportunity to do it. And you have because arms race, it's a race. You know the starting line. You don't know the finishing line.
And just very quickly, who are the main actors fueling this new arms race? What are you seeing fueling it?
So everybody, because if Russia is increasing its weapons industry, we are doing the same in Europe, and US want to because in fact Trump want to make a deal, buy more US weapons, and I will stay in NATO. And from the last 2 years, European countries were buying 63% of their importation to US. And of course, the rise of China military expenditure have for side effect to see Japan and South Korea increasing their own military expenditure. So it's a worldwide movement, and a very negative one, because you have no more security with more weapons. You have less security with more, but as we have no multilateralism to reach this amount, you need a multilateral framework, a multilateral decision. But as we don't agree on this multilateralism, it's just impossible to stop the arms race.
Very quickly, two more questions.
Because I think it was also
on disarmament.
Directed. You said North Atlantic, but you probably meant American perspective. You just got a North Atlantic perspective. But look, I mean, there was a gentleman from NDU who qualified, I think, some of his comments the other day. Said, I'm speaking for myself. I don't speak for the United States. I'll say the same. But that, the center of gravity in Washington on this sort of thinking when it comes to defense spending and disarmament, looking at Europe, for example, is that Europe tried that. I mean, Europe was de facto disarming. And a lot of statistics have been thrown around in recent years about, not to single out countries here, but 80% of Belgian military spending went towards salary and pensions. There you go. Some people said, the Belgian military was a well-armed pension fund. Not fair, I know. But that there was this, it wasn't an organized sort of case study, but de facto, this is what occurred in Europe. This is the perspective that many folks in Washington have. And what kind of security situation do we have now in Europe? Not a very good one.
Nope.
I think we can all agree on that. Which isn't to say that maximizing armaments and going up to everyone spending 8% on GDP is the answer. But there is the argument, and I personally think it's a rational one, that there is a balance to be struck here, that deterrence is part of the peace equation. And that you cannot have deterrence without some level of military spending and some level of armament. If you combine deterrence with communication and multilateral fora, the sorts that we've been talking about during this conference, I do think that is the approach that we should be taking both at a regional and a global level. But disarmament, I think, goes too far. I think that word, certainly in Washington, turns off a lot of stakeholders, and it's not something that they adhere to. Speaking from a country that's about to hit $1 trillion in defense spending.
Thank you, Daniel. We'll go to the concluding words. Minister.
Je souhaiterais répondre quand même à la question qui a été posée et relative
sur le désarmement.
Non, la piraterie.
Ah, la piraterie.
La piraterie.
Donc la solution, elle comme.
questions have been asked about piracy. Indeed, we have security concerns in the seas as well as on land. I would simply like to specify what I have mentioned earlier. It is not, my point was not that single countries are able to protect their territories in silo. Each country needs to at least aim for security at the national level and must take that step forward. They should at least try. Why? Because sovereignty issues are issues related to national security. So nations have to take accountability for their security territorially. Of course, they cannot alone guarantee security for a whole region. This is why today we need to work with our neighbors as countries in order to ensure collective security. And obviously, because of the sensitivity of the issue, as well as the scope of the issue of piracy, we must act together and collaborate. I completely agree with you. Pascal, if you have any concluding remarks. Indeed, we suffer from individualism and selfishness demonstrated by nations as well as leaders. We have the right to be selfish, but we cannot lack intelligence. The world must unite and also capitalize on multilateralism. There are multilateralism-linked challenges, and we must respond to those collectively. Thank you very much. Thank you all for watching and participating to this.